Can you still picture the coal fire glowing on reused tinsel? Or hear your grandmother's mixing bowl as she made Christmas dishes passed down through generations? Before shortcuts and boxed mixes, British Christmas cooking was a ritual, slow, careful, and full of memory. These forgotten recipes once defined the season, born from thrift, celebration, and tradition. Join us as we rediscover 25 Christmas dishes our grandparents knew and we have nearly lost, each one a small doorway back to a simpler, warmer holiday. Potato-based mock mince pies. Long before supermarket pastry cases overflowed with glossy mince pies, British households, still feeling the pinch of post-war rationing, created a Christmas treat that would puzzle modern bakers: potato-based mince pies. Yes, potato. Your grandmother would begin by boiling a few floury potatoes until soft, then mashing them while still steaming hot. Into this she would work a little margarine and just enough flour to form a soft, pliable dough. Money was tight, sugar scarcer still, and real butter a luxury. So this humble mixture became the pastry for an entire season's worth of festive pies. She would roll it out gently, knowing it tore easily, and line each tin with care. The filling was usually homemade mincemeat, often bulked out with extra apples or grated carrot to stretch precious dried fruits. When baked, the crust turned tender and slightly sweet, with a faint earthiness that reminded everyone of the cleverness required to keep Christmas magical. These pies were not just dessert, they were evidence of resilience wrapped in tradition. Mincemeat stuffed apples. Picture a house in the 1950s at Christmas where nothing, truly nothing, was allowed to go to waste. Apples, especially windfalls from the garden, became vessels for holiday flavor. Your grandmother would core each apple carefully, keeping the shape intact, then pack the hollow center with rich, spiced mincemeat. That mincemeat was often homemade, thick with currants, suet, candied peel, and the scent of cloves and nutmeg that instantly meant Christmas. Before baking, the apples were dotted with a little butter and sprinkled with brown sugar. As they baked, their skins would split slightly and release a perfume that filled every corner of the house, sweet fruit mingling with spice and nostalgia. These were not showy desserts. They were the quiet, homely kind you ate by the fire with a spoon, the juices running down the sides of the plate. Children loved them because they tasted like warm Christmas pudding without the heft. Today, stuffed apples have all but disappeared, but their memory lingers like the scent of cinnamon in a winter kitchen. Suet pudding with currants, Christmas spotted dick. Before every home had ready-made desserts stacked in the pantry, Christmas warmth often arrived in the form of a heavy pudding basin steaming gently on the stovetop. Suet pudding with currants, known in many families as Christmas spotted dick, was a December ritual. Your grandmother would rub shredded suet into flour by hand until the mixture resembled fresh snow, then fold in currants or raisins saved from ration books or carefully portioned throughout the year. Milk or water turned the mixture into a thick batter that plopped into a greased basin with a satisfying weight. Covered with cloth and tied tightly with string, it steamed for hours, fogging the kitchen windows and scenting the air with nutmeg and nostalgia. When unmolded, it emerged golden and studded with fruit, dense but comforting. Served with ladles of hot custard, it warmed cold hands and bellies alike. It wasn't fancy, but it tasted of home and enduring tradition. 4. Chestnut and prune stuffing. Before boxed stuffing mixes became the unquestioned favorite, British Christmas dinners often included a deeply traditional, and now nearly forgotten, stuffing of chestnuts and prunes. Your grandmother would spend an afternoon roasting chestnuts over the open flame or in the oven, cracking their warm shells one by one, her fingertips reddened from the heat. the prunes soaked in tea or brandy until plump and fragrant. When combined with breadcrumbs, onions softened in dripping, and a generous handful of winter herbs, sage, bay, and thyme, the mixture became rich, dark, and almost medieval in character. It filled the bird with both sweetness and depth, perfuming the meat in a way modern stuffings rarely manage. Some families added streaky bacon or even a splash of port for luxury. This stuffing was less about convenience and more about ceremony. Slow preparation, seasonal ingredients, and flavors bold enough to stand up to a Christmas feast. It vanished quietly by the 1980s, leaving behind only memories of its warming, aromatic charm. 5. Boiled bacon with parsley sauce. Once upon a time, Christmas didn't end with leftover turkey. It continued with the comforting simplicity of boiled bacon served with parsley sauce on Boxing Day. This dish was a staple in countless British homes, especially in the 1950s when frugality reigned and nothing from the holiday table went unused. Your grandmother would select a piece of streaky or gammon bacon, simmering it slowly with carrots, onions, and perhaps a bay leaf until the kitchen smelled both savory and soothing. The meat emerged tender, salty, and perfectly sliceable. But the real magic came from the parsley sauce. Milk thickened with a roux, stirred patiently until glossy, then infused with fresh chopped parsley that added brightness to winter's grey days. Served with boiled potatoes or cold leftover vegetables, it felt like gentleness after the richness of Christmas Day. This meal wasn't glamorous, but it was grounding, a quiet ritual of comfort and thriftiness that anchored families in the days between Christmas and New Year. Jugged hare. Before supermarkets made meat predictable and uniform, Christmas occasionally featured something more adventurous: jugged hare, a dish now nearly vanished from British tables. Your grandparents would acquire the hare, often from a neighbor, sometimes from a local hunter, already skinned but unmistakably wild. The meat was marinated overnight in wine, vinegar, onions, and a handful of winter spices. On Christmas Eve, your grandmother would simmer it slowly in a heavy jug or earthenware pot set in a water bath, the hare cooking in its own juices until the tough flesh yielded into rich, gamey tenderness. Blood or liver was often added at the end to deepen the sauce into something silky and dark. This was a dish of ceremony and patience, its aroma earthy and unmistakable, filling the house with old-world comfort. Jugged hare disappeared as tastes shifted and convenience ruled. But for families who knew it, the memory remains of a Christmas meal both rustic and deeply rooted in country tradition. Rabbit pie. In post-war Britain, rabbit wasn't an exotic ingredient. It was a necessity. Christmas in many rural households included a rabbit pie that stretched meat as far as it needed to go. Your grandmother would joint the rabbit with practiced hands, simmering the pieces with onions, carrots, and herbs until the meat was tender enough to pull from the bone. The resulting broth became the base for a thick, savory gravy kissed with winter spices, just a hint of nutmeg or clove. She'd line a deep enamel dish with homemade pastry, sturdy and slightly rustic, then pile in the meat and vegetables before sealing it with a crimped lid that puffed and browned as it baked. The smell alone could draw children from outside play on frosty afternoons. Rabbit pie wasn't a luxury, far from it, but it tasted like care and resourcefulness, the kind of dish families gathered around before televisions, sharing warmth that came from both the meal and the maker's hands. If you're enjoying this trip down memory lane, tap like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of these forgotten Christmas classics. Once found on nearly every hotel and railway dining menu, brown Windsor soup was a proud, hearty beginning to many Christmas dinners in the 1950s. Thick, dark, and almost stew-like, it embodied the era's belief that a proper meal should stick to your ribs. Your grandmother would brown beef or mutton deeply in dripping until the kitchen filled with that unmistakable savory aroma. Flour, stock, and sometimes a splash of port or stout turned it into a velvety broth. Root vegetables, carrot, onion, perhaps a parsnip, were chopped finely and left to melt into the mixture during a slow simmer. The spices were modest but warming. A pinch of pepper, a whisper of allspice, maybe a bay leaf. Served piping hot in chipped china bowls, it warmed cold fingers and set the tone for the feast to come. This soup faded from fashion as tastes lightened, but its memory remains tied to a time when Christmas meals began with something simple, strong, and deeply comforting. Before turkey conquered the British Christmas table, goose was the festive bird of choice, a tradition stretching back centuries. Your grandparents may remember the excitement of collecting the goose from the butcher. Its weight was substantial, its skin thick with the fat that made it both luxurious and practical. On Christmas morning, your grandmother would prick the skin carefully to help render that rich fat, which she would later save for the best roast potatoes imaginable. The bird roasted slowly, filling the house with an aroma more robust than turkey, dark, slightly gamey, and unmistakably celebratory. Inside she might pack a stuffing of apples, onions, and sage, the juices turning everything tender and fragrant. Goose was not just a meal, it was the centerpiece of a table crowded with family and candlelight. As turkeys became cheaper and easier to prepare, goose faded from view, but its memory remains wrapped in nostalgia for a Christmas that felt grand, intimate, and steeped in tradition. Mock turtle soup, strange, rich, and unmistakably Victorian, lingered in British homes well into the 1950s. Its origins were humble. Real turtle was a delicacy reserved for the upper classes, so cooks created a clever imitation using calf's head, organ meats, or later more affordable cuts of beef. Your grandmother might have simmered these ingredients for hours with onions, carrots, cloves, and lemon peel, creating a broth both savory and slightly sweet. Hard-boiled eggs, chopped fine, mimicked the texture of turtle meat, while a splash of sherry transformed the pot into something festive. The result was a deep, brown soup served as a Christmas starter, its aroma rich enough to fill the house. Families saw it as a mark of skill, a dish too labor-intensive for everyday cooking but worthy of the holiday table. Today, mock turtle soup is nearly forgotten, tucked away in century-old cookbooks, but it once symbolized thrift and creativity, and a uniquely British approach to keeping old traditions alive. Sardine or pilchard toasts. In the 1950s and the 1960s, before prawn cocktails and vol au vents stole the spotlight, Christmas canapes were simple, salty, and deeply nostalgic. None more so than sardine or pilchard toasts. Your grandmother would open a tin with that distinctive metal hiss, tip the fish into a bowl, and mash it gently with a fork. A squeeze of lemon, a dab of butter, and sometimes a spoonful of vinegar sharpened the flavor. Spread onto triangles of hot toast, the mixture became a budget-friendly treat that tasted far grander than it looked. Some families sprinkled chopped parsley for color, others topped them with paper-thin cucumber slices or a dusting of paprika. These toasts were eaten warm, passed around on mismatched plates while relatives chatted, and the wireless hummed in the background. Their robust, sea-salty flavor paired perfectly with a small glass of sherry. Today they have nearly disappeared, but for those who remember them, one bite recalls an era when Christmas entertaining was humble, hearty, and entirely homemade. Anchovy eggs. No Christmas party buffet in the 1960s was complete without a plate of anchovy eggs glistening under fluorescent lights. Your grandmother began with hard-boiled eggs, cooled and halved with care so the yolks stayed bright and crumbly. Those yolks were mashed with softened butter, mustard, and most importantly, anchovy paste, that deep, briny secret ingredient that gave everything a savory intensity. She would pipe or spoon the mixture back into the whites, shaping small domes that smelled faintly of the sea. A single anchovy fillet curled on top was the hallmark of a hostess who took pride in her canapes. Guests would hover around the plate, spearing eggs with toothpicks as conversations about the latest black and white telly programs filled the room. Anchovy eggs were bold, unapologetic, and oddly elegant, a relic of a time when strong flavors were considered sophisticated. Today they seem almost daring, but once they were a Christmas standard, eaten with relish and a sip of sweet wine. 13. Celery and Stilton soup, original version. Long before thick, creamy Stilton soups arrived in gastropubs, the original celery and Stilton soup was a more humble, brothy affair found on mid-century Christmas menus. Your grandmother would chop bunches of celery, leaves and all, releasing that unmistakable fresh, green scent that brightened dark winter afternoons. She simmered it slowly with onions, potatoes, and a modest amount of stock, letting the vegetables soften into a delicate, fragrant base. Only at the end would she crumble in a small amount of Stilton, just enough to lend the soup depth without overpowering it. The cheese melted into the broth, not into a thick creaminess, but into a gentle richness that whispered rather than shouted. Ladled into floral china bowls and served with buttered bread, it warmed hands after long walks home from Christmas shopping. It was simple, economical, and quietly elegant. This lighter version faded as tastes shifted toward cream-heavy indulgence, but its memory remains tied to gentler, thrifty celebrations. Curried fruit salad. Few dishes capture the experimental spirit of the 1960s like curried fruit salad, an odd combination that somehow found its way onto Christmas tables during the decade's adventurous food trends. Your grandmother would chop apples, pears, and bananas, then toss them with sultanas and tinned pineapple, the syrupy sweetness perfuming the air. The dressing was where the magic, or the madness, happened. It was a mixture of mayonnaise, lemon juice, and curry powder, whisked together until golden and aromatic. When poured over the fruit, it produced a flavor both sweet and lightly spiced, surprisingly refreshing after a heavy Christmas dinner. Some cooks added chopped nuts for crunch, others folded in coconut or celery for contrast. It appeared at church socials, office parties, and Boxing Day buffets, always greeted first with raised eyebrows and then with curiosity. Though it vanished as the decade's enthusiasm cooled, those who grew up with it remember its playful charm, a dish that dared to be different during a time when Britain discovered spices again. 15. Ham and banana hollandaise. Of all the dishes from the 1960s that are now lost to time, none raises more eyebrows today than ham and banana hollandaise, a creation so strange it could only have come from a decade determined to impress dinner guests with daring combinations. Your grandmother would wrap slices of cooked ham around whole bananas, arranging them neatly in a buttered dish. Over the top she poured homemade hollandaise, gently whisked until pale, silky, and lemon-scented. Once baked, the bananas softened into a creamy sweetness that contrasted sharply with the salty ham, while the hollandaise browned in golden patches. This dish was not everyday fare. It was showy, experimental, a talking point for festive dinner parties where guests sipped babycham and admired the hostess's bravery. Though nearly forgotten now, it represents a moment in British food history when imagination trumped tradition, when cooks saw Christmas as a chance to surprise. Today it lives on mostly in vintage cookbooks, a quirky relic of a wonderfully bold era. Tomato aspic, tomato jelly salad. Before sleek, modern starters took over, Christmas tables sometimes featured a shimmering, ruby-red tomato aspic, part salad, part savory jelly, entirely mid-century. Made with tomato juice, vinegar, spices, and unflavored gelatin, the mixture was heated gently until the kitchen filled with the tangy scent of tomatoes and cloves. After chilling in a ring mold, it emerged glossy and wobbly, catching the festive lights like stained glass. Your grandmother might have folded in chopped celery, olives, or even tiny prawns, turning it into a textural adventure. Served on lettuce leaves with a dollop of mayonnaise, it was considered sophisticated, the sort of dish seen in women's magazines and admired at church luncheons. Guests approached it cautiously, forks trembling as the aspic trembled back. Though its savory wobble is rarely seen today, for decades it graced British holiday buffets as a symbol of modern homemaking, meticulous, decorative, and proud of its place among the Christmas spread. Pork pie with cranberries. A cold collation. Long before sausage rolls became Britain's default Boxing Day nibble, families gathered around cold collations featuring hearty pork pies brightened with cranberries. Your grandmother would purchase or prepare a raised pie, its hot water crust sturdy enough to hold the rich, peppery pork filling. On Christmas night or Boxing Day morning, she'd slice it thickly, the jelly glistening beneath the flaky crust. Beside it, she'd place a dish of homemade cranberry relish, tart, jewel-like, and deeply fragrant. The combination of savory and sharp felt perfect after the indulgence of Christmas dinner. Served with pickled onions, cheese, and buttered bread, it was a feast without fuss, meant for relaxed hours spent with family, nibbling between conversations. This tradition faded as convenience foods rose and grazing boards replaced cold spreads. But the memory of pork pie with cranberries lingers as a snapshot of British practicality. Simple food, served cold, eaten in good company as the fire crackled low. 18. Brawn, head cheese. Once a staple on winter tables, brawn, also known as head cheese, was a thrifty dish that stretched pork into something substantial and celebratory. Your grandmother began by simmering a pig's head or trotters with onions, carrots, bay leaves, and peppercorns until the meat fell from the bone and the broth thickened with natural gelatin. She would pick through the tender pieces, choosing the best bits to chop finely before mixing them back into the fragrant stock. Poured into loaf tins and left to set in the icy cold pantry, it emerged as a shimmering, savory terrine. Sliced and served with mustard, pickles, or crusty bread, it was a Boxing Day favorite. Protein-rich, flavorful, and remarkably satisfying. Children might have eyed it warily, but adults appreciated its economy and depth. Brawn faded as post-war thrift gave way to convenience shopping, but it remains a quiet testament to resourcefulness and the ability to turn every part of the animal into nourishment. Number 19. Trifle with tinned fruit, cocktail, and sherry. Before trifles became towering creations with artisanal sponge and luxury custard, there was the classic mid-century version. Tinned fruit cocktail, strawberry jelly, bird's custard, and a generous splash of sherry. Your grandmother would start the night before, lining the glass bowl with Swiss roll slices and pouring sherry slowly until each piece swelled with boozy sweetness. Over this she poured warm jelly studded with pieces of peach, pear, grapes, and those infamous bright red cherries swimming in syrup. Once set, she added thick custard, the kind cooked slowly until just starting to steam, and finally a layer of whipped evaporated milk, or dream topping. The result was soft, sweet, and nostalgic, the flavors mingling into something unmistakably festive. Trifle bowls sat proudly at the center of Boxing Day tables, their colorful layers gleaming beneath the fairy lights. Today's versions may be more refined, but none taste quite like the one that defined British Christmases for generations. 20. Kedgeree, Christmas morning breakfast. Christmas morning breakfasts once favored hearty, warming dishes like kedgeree, an Anglo-Indian creation that blended rice, smoked fish, and spices into something both comforting and exotic. Your grandmother would flake smoked haddock into tender pieces, folding them gently through rice cooked with a hint of turmeric for golden color. Hard-boiled eggs, chopped parsley, and a knob of butter completed the mixture, releasing steam fragrant with warmth and home. Some households added a dash of curry powder, others a squeeze of lemon to brighten the richness. Kedgeree was eaten mid-morning after stockings were opened, but before the full Christmas dinner began, a sustaining, savory pause in a day otherwise filled with sweets. Served in chipped enamel dishes, it brought a touch of colonial-era nostalgia to British kitchens. As breakfast cereals and pastries took over, the tradition faded. But for those who remember it, kedgeree tastes like calmness on a magical morning, simple, filling, and shared before the celebrations truly began. Mock cream cakes. In the years after rationing, when butter remained expensive and margarine ruled the larder, Christmas treats often featured mock cream, a clever sweet filling made by beating margarine with sugar and a splash of vanilla. Your grandmother would whip the mixture until pale, fluffy, and convincing enough to resemble real cream, then sandwich it between sponge buns or pipe it into small fairy cakes baked just for the season. For children, these were pure delight, soft cakes with a creamy center that tasted indulgent even if the ingredients were humble. Some versions added a spoonful of milk to lighten the mixture, others used custard powder for color. These cakes were kept in tins high in the pantry and brought out only when visitors arrived or when holiday excitement demanded a treat. Today, mock cream has all but disappeared, replaced by buttercream and ready-made frostings. But it survives in memory as a symbol of ingenuity, proof that even simple ingredients could create Christmas magic. Queen of Puddings. Once a beloved household dessert, the Queen of Puddings reigned over many British Christmas tables before more complicated sweets took center stage. Your grandmother would heat milk with butter, sugar, and lemon zest, then pour it over breadcrumbs to swell into a fragrant, custard-like base. After baking until just set, she would spread a layer of homemade jam, often raspberry or black currant, across the top, its ruby glow a promise of sweetness. Finally came the meringue, whipped to glossy peaks and carefully piped or spooned over the pudding before returning it to the oven to bake to a delicate golden brown. When served, each spoonful offered comforting layers: warm custard, tangy jam, and cloud-like meringue. It was elegant yet economical, perfect for a post-Christmas feast when ingredients needed stretching. The Queen of Puddings faded as modern desserts grew richer and more elaborate, but she remains a gentle reminder of a time when thrift and beauty coexisted at the table. Whiskey Mac. Every Christmas gathering in the 60s and the 70s seemed to include at least one uncle warming his hands around a whiskey mac, a simple but powerful cocktail made by mixing whiskey with ginger wine. Poured into small, sturdy glasses, the drink glowed amber in the festive lights, sending up a warming aroma of spice and spirit. Your grandfather might have prepared them as guests arrived, the clink of bottle against glass a familiar soundtrack to holiday evenings. The flavor was bold yet comforting. The ginger wine added sweetness and heat, cutting through the whiskey's sharpness and creating a drink that spread warmth right down to the fingertips. It was the sort of cocktail meant for storytelling, for laughing over old memories, or quietly watching snow fall outside. As cocktail culture changed, the whiskey mac slipped from fashion, but it remains a symbol of mid-century Christmas hospitality, a simple drink that made cold nights feel cozy and cheerful. 24. Sherry-soaked prune whip. Long before mousse came in powdered packets, British cooks whipped up airy desserts like sherry-soaked prune whip for holiday dinners. Your grandmother would soak prunes in sweet sherry until they swelled with flavor, then pureed them into a dark, glossy paste that smelled faintly of caramel and fruitcake. Egg whites were beaten to stiff peaks, an art in itself, before being folded gently into the prune mixture to create a cloud-like, gently spiced pudding. Chilled in glass dishes, it set into something impossibly light yet deeply flavored, a contrast that delighted guests who expected heavier fare. Sometimes she topped it with a spoonful of whipped evaporated milk or a scatter of chopped nuts. It was a dessert that belonged to an age when cooks transformed simple ingredients into something elegant with nothing more than patience and skill. Today it is nearly forgotten, but one taste brings back the quiet sophistication of Christmas dinners in the 1950s. Number 25. Brandy snaps filled with mock cream. Brandy snaps still appear in shops today, but the homemade version, filled with old-fashioned mock cream, was once a treasured Christmas treat. Your grandmother began by melting butter, sugar, and golden syrup together until the kitchen smelled warm and toffee-rich. Flour and ginger were stirred in, forming a batter that spread into thin circles in the oven. As soon as they emerged, still pliable and dangerously hot, she'd roll each one around the handle of a wooden spoon, forming crisp golden tubes that hardened within seconds. The filling was mock cream, margarine beaten with sugar and vanilla until light, sweet, and surprisingly convincing. She piped it into each brandy snap just before serving, so they remained perfectly crisp. The first bite shattered delicately, giving way to the soft sweetness inside. They were fragile, fleeting, and utterly festive. While modern versions use whipped cream, the originals hold a special place in memory, tiny masterpieces of texture and thrift that defined mid-century Christmas cheer. Share your own Christmas memories in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more forgotten recipes and festive nostalgia.